Hello, my fellow dreamer. Welcome to this journey through time, a journey through shadows and legends, through history and mystery. Tonight, we explore the story of a medieval prince who became the world's most famous vampire. We'll travel from the Carpathian Mountains to Victorian London, from historical battlefields to the realm of folklore and film. This is a story about fear and power, about how legends are born, and how the shadow side of human nature, the parts we hide even from ourselves, finds expression in our myths and monsters. But before we descend into those shadows, let us take a moment to acknowledge the light. Before we explore the darkness of legends, let's ground ourselves in the brightness of this day that is now ending. Think gently now of 3 things from today, 3 things you are grateful for. They can be small: a warm cup of coffee, a message from a friend, the feeling of sunlight on your skin, or they can be profound: health, love, safety. Whatever comes to mind, just notice them, acknowledge them, and let a gentle sense of gratitude settle in your chest. Good. You've honored the day that was. And now you can release it. Let it go. The day is done. And you've done enough. It's time now to rest. Find yourself in a comfortable position. Take a slow, deep breath in and release it completely. Feel your body settling, growing heavy, relaxed. Let your shoulders drop, your jaw soften, your eyes gently close. As we journey together tonight, you can allow yourself to drift deeper and deeper into relaxation. If you fall asleep during this story, that's wonderful. That's exactly what should happen. There's no right or wrong, only rest, only peace. Let us begin our journey now, traveling back through time, through the mists of history, to a land of mountains and mystery, to the realm of Dracula. The land of shadows, the mountain kingdom. Close your eyes now and imagine with me, if you can, though you don't have to imagine anything at all. You can simply listen and drift. Picture the Carpathian Mountains, rising like ancient giants from the earth, their peaks touching the clouds. Forests of dark green covering their slopes like a thick blanket. Mist rolling through the valleys, settling in the low places, creating an atmosphere of mystery and timelessness. This is Wallachia, a land that existed in what we now call Romania. In the 1400s, 500 years ago, this was a small principality, a small nation, caught between 3 great powers. The Kingdom of Hungary to the west and north, the Ottoman Empire to the south and east, and the fierce independence of its own people, the Wallachians. The Danube River marked the southern border, its wide waters flowing steadily, endlessly, toward the Black Sea. On the other side of the river, the Ottomans. On this side, the Wallachians, trying to remain free. The Carpathian Mountains formed a natural wall to the north. Their passes were the gateways between Transylvania and Wallachia. Merchants traveled these routes. Armies marched through them. And in winter, snow closed them completely, isolating the mountain valleys, making them quiet, making them still. In this land, around 500,000 people lived, farming the rich plains of the south, herding sheep in the mountain meadows, living in wooden houses, gathering in small villages around Orthodox churches with their distinctive domes and painted walls. Life was simple, but not easy. The soil was fertile. Wheat and corn grew well. Grapes for wine covered the hillsides. But this land was also a crossroads. And crossroads attract both traders and invaders. The Order of the Dragon. Now, let us meet a man named Vlad. Vlad II. In the year 1431, this Vlad was inducted into a special order, a brotherhood of knights, called the Order of the Dragon. The Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund created this order. Its purpose was to defend Christianity, to defend Europe from the expanding Ottoman Empire. The symbol was a dragon, coiled, powerful. In those times, the dragon represented strength, protection, divine power. When Vlad joined this order, he earned a new name, Vlad Dracula. Dracula means the dragon, but in the Romanian language, it can also mean the devil. A name with two meanings, one noble, one dark. Vlad Dracula had several children, and in the winter of 1431, in the Transylvanian town of Sighisoara, his second son was born. This boy was named Vlad, like his father. But as the son of Dracula, he would be known by a different name. Dracula, meaning son of the dragon, or son of the devil. Little Vlad Dracula grew up in fortified houses, in castles with thick stone walls. He learned to ride horses, to use weapons, to read and write. Latin, Romanian, Church Slavonic. He was being prepared to be a ruler, a voivode, a military governor of Wallachia. But childhood in these times was brief, and young Vlad's life was about to change in ways no child should experience. Years in captivity. In the year 1442, when Vlad was only 11 years old, his father made a difficult political decision to maintain peace with the Ottoman Sultan. Vlad Dracula sent two of his sons as hostages to the Ottoman court, young Vlad and his brother Radu. Imagine being 11 years old, taken from your home, from your mother, traveling for weeks on horseback, further and further from everything familiar, to a foreign palace, where people speak a language you don't know, worship a different god, follow different customs. The Sultan's court was in Edirne, and later in Constantinople. These were magnificent cities, far grander than anything in Wallachia. Marble palaces, intricate tile work, gardens with fountains. But for young Vlad, they were a prison, a beautiful prison, but a prison nonetheless. The boys were held for 5 years. From age 11 to 16 for Vlad. These are formative years, the years when a boy becomes a man, when character is shaped, when the world's lessons are learned most deeply. The Ottomans were not cruel to the boys. They were hostages, not slaves. They received education. They learned Turkish, Arabic, Persian. They studied science and philosophy, art and literature. They learned military tactics, horsemanship, swordplay. They were being trained, shaped, perhaps, to one day rule Wallachia as Ottoman allies. But young Vlad was proud, stubborn. He resisted. He refused to fully accept his captor's culture. This resistance led to punishments. We don't know the details. History doesn't record them. But we know he was sometimes confined, sometimes disciplined harshly. And he saw things. In the Ottoman Empire, those who betrayed the Sultan, those who rebelled, faced a particular form of execution. They were impaled, placed upon tall wooden stakes, displayed as warnings to others. Young Vlad saw these sights. And perhaps, in his mind, he learned a lesson about power, about fear, about control. His brother Radu, younger, more adaptable, embraced Ottoman culture. Radu the Handsome, they called him. He became favored at court. Perhaps this created jealousy, perhaps resentment. Two brothers, taking different paths, paths that would later lead them to become enemies. Family tragedy. While Vlad was held in the East, events were unfolding in Wallachia that would change his life forever. In December of 1447, Vlad's father, Vlad Dracula, was assassinated, killed by rival nobles, the boyars, with support from the Hungarian regent John Hunyadi. His body was left in the swamps near the town of Baltini. Vlad's older brother, Mircea, was captured. He was tortured and killed. Some say he was buried alive. The exact details are unclear, lost to time. But the result is certain. Vlad lost his father and his eldest brother in a single violent political upheaval. When news reached the Ottoman court, Sultan Murad II released young Vlad. He was 16 years old. An orphan. A prince without a principality. The Ottomans gave him a small army, and briefly, very briefly, in 1448, he seized the throne of Wallachia. But his rule lasted only 2 months. He was too young, too inexperienced, too hated by the boyars who had killed his father. He was driven out, into exile. For the next several years, Vlad wandered. He sought refuge in Moldavia, in Transylvania. He studied. He planned. He waited, building alliances, learning patience, preparing for his return. And in 1456, after 8 years of exile, with Hungarian support this time, Vlad returned to Wallachia. This time, he would not be driven out so easily. This time, his rule would be remembered for centuries to come. The prince's reign. Consolidation of power. When Vlad took the throne in 1456, he was 25 years old. He had experienced betrayal, captivity, exile, loss. He had seen his family destroyed by ambitious nobles, by the boyars who held so much power in Wallachia. Vlad knew that to truly rule, he needed to break their power. The boyar families had controlled Wallachia for generations. They made and unmade princes. They enriched themselves while the common people suffered. They owed no loyalty to the throne, only to themselves. Vlad's methods were direct and harsh. He invited the leading boyar families to a great Easter feast at his palace in Targovist. It was 1459. After the meal, after the wine had flowed, he asked them a question. How many princes have you seen in your lifetimes? Some answered 7, some answered 10, some even more. The point was clear. The boyars had outlived many princes. They were the real power, not the throne. What happened next is recorded in the chronicles, though details vary. Vlad had the eldest boyars arrested and executed. The younger ones, those strong enough to work, were marched north into the mountains, to the ruins of an old fortress. There, they were forced to rebuild it, working month after month, until their fine clothes fell to rags, until their soft hands became calloused, until many died from exhaustion. This fortress became known as Poenary Castle. Vlad's mountain retreat, perched on a cliff high above the Argesh River. To reach it required climbing 1,480 steps carved into the mountainside. It was impregnable. It was his sanctuary. The message to the other nobles was clear. The old ways were over. Power now resided with the prince alone. Justice and order. Vlad's rule was characterized by harsh justice, but also by order. He created laws and enforced them strictly. The same laws applied to nobles and peasants alike. This was unusual for the time. Theft, in most of medieval Europe, was common, expected. But under Vlad's rule, theft was punished severely. The chronicles tell a story, perhaps exaggerated, perhaps not, that Vlad placed a golden cup by a public fountain in Targovist. Anyone could drink from it, but no one could take it. And no one did. For years, the cup remained untouched, because people feared the consequences. Merchants could travel Wallachia's roads without fear of bandits. Peasants could leave their tools in the fields overnight. Crime dropped dramatically, through fear, yes, but the result was order, stability, something rare in those chaotic times. However, Vlad's methods of punishment were severe. Those who broke his laws faced execution, and the method he favored was one he had learned during his captivity with the Ottomans, a method designed to inspire maximum fear. He would have criminals impaled on wooden stakes, displayed along the roads as warnings to others. We will not dwell on these details. They were brutal, as was the age. What matters for our story is understanding the fear this created. Fear was Vlad's tool of governance. His name became synonymous with terror, even during his lifetime. The Ottoman Wars. The greatest challenge of Vlad's reign came from the south, from the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Mehmed II. Mehmed the Conqueror. In 1453, 3 years before Vlad took power, Mehmed had conquered Constantinople. The great Byzantine capital, the jewel of Christendom, had fallen after 1,000 years. The Ottoman Empire was at its height, expanding in all directions, and Wallachia was in its path. The Sultan demanded tribute from Wallachia, gold, silver, young boys to train as janissaries. Vlad had paid tribute early in his reign, but by 1459, he stopped. He refused to pay. He refused to send Wallachia's children to Istanbul. More than that, he launched raids across the Danube, into Ottoman territory, attacking fortresses, freeing prisoners, disrupting the Sultan's control of the region. In 1462, Sultan Mehmed had enough. He assembled a massive army, estimates range from 60,000 to 300,000 men, probably somewhere in between. And he marched north, toward Wallachia, to crush this defiant prince once and for all. Vlad had perhaps 30,000 men, maybe less. He could not face the Ottomans in open battle. So he used different tactics. He poisoned wells, burned crops and villages in the Ottoman path, left nothing for the invading army to use. This is called scorched earth warfare. Leave the enemy nothing but ashes and dust. On the night of June 17th, 1462, Vlad launched a daring raid. Under cover of darkness, his forces attacked the Ottoman camp near Targovist. Chaos erupted, soldiers waking to find enemies among them. Vlad himself nearly reached the Sultan's tent, nearly assassinated men in his sleep. But the attempt failed, and Vlad withdrew into the darkness. The next morning, Sultan Mehmed approached Targovist and witnessed a sight that would be recorded in Ottoman chronicles for generations. Outside the city, for miles, thousands of stakes. And on these stakes, thousands of Ottoman prisoners, captured from previous battles, executed as a message, as a demonstration of defiance. The chroniclers recorded that Sultan Mehmed, who had conquered Constantinople, who had crushed armies across 3 continents, was deeply disturbed by this sight. The scale of it, the deliberate cruelty. Some accounts say he turned his army around soon after. Others say he continued briefly before withdrawing. Either way, the invasion ended. Wallachia remained free, for the moment. But Vlad's defiance came at a cost. Exile and return. The Sultan, unable to defeat Vlad directly, turned to politics. He supported Vlad's brother, Radu the Handsome, the brother who had remained loyal to the Ottomans, as a rival claimant to the throne. Civil war erupted in Wallachia. Brother against brother. Those who feared Vlad's harsh rule, those who wanted peace with the Ottomans, sided with Radu. Gradually, Vlad's support crumbled. In late 1462, Vlad fled north, seeking help from the Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus. But Matthias, suspicious, or perhaps bribed by Vlad's enemies, had him arrested instead. Vlad spent the next 12 to 14 years in prison in Hungary, mostly in Visegrad Castle, high above the Danube. Some sources say he was briefly held at Bran Castle in Transylvania, but this is uncertain. What is certain is that years passed, locked away, his throne occupied by his brother, his legacy seemingly finished. During these years, Radu ruled Wallachia as an Ottoman ally. But Radu died in 1475, and political circumstances changed. The Hungarians decided they needed a strong, anti-Ottoman ruler in Wallachia once again. In 1476, Vlad was released, given an army, and returned to Wallachia. His third reign had begun. But it would not last long. In December 1476, or perhaps January 1477, the sources disagree. Vlad was ambushed. Some say by Ottoman forces, some say by rival Wallachian nobles, perhaps both. He was killed in battle. His head was severed and sent to Constantinople, where Sultan Mehmed had it displayed on a stake. Final revenge. Final irony. The prince who had used the stake so often ended on one himself. His body, tradition says, was buried at Snagov Monastery, on an island in a lake north of Bucharest. But when archaeologists excavated the supposed tomb in the 1930s, they found nothing, no bones, no evidence, just an empty space. And so, the mystery deepens. Where does Vlad rest? Does he rest at all? Or does he wander still, through the mists of legend, never quite gone, never fully present? A ghost between history and myth. Legends in the mist. Folklore of the night. Let us leave history for a moment and enter the realm of folklore, the stories that people across Eastern Europe told by firelight, the legends passed from generation to generation, the beliefs that shaped their world. In the folklore of this region, there exists a rich tradition of supernatural beliefs. Stories of spirits and creatures of the night. These weren't unique to any one country, but were shared across cultures. Each nation had its own names, its own variations, but similar themes. Similar attempts to explain the mysteries of death and the unknown. In Romanian tradition, there is the strigoi. In Serbian folklore, the vampire. In Bulgarian tales, the obor. In Greek stories, the vrikalakas. Different names for similar concepts. The idea that sometimes the dead do not rest peacefully. That certain circumstances can prevent the soul from moving on, leaving it trapped between worlds. What causes this? According to the old beliefs, many things. Dying without proper funeral rites, dying violently, being unbaptized, being born with certain signs or during certain times. These weren't considered curses, but rather misfortunes. Things that could happen to anyone. And communities developed rituals, protections, ways to help both the living and the dead find peace. The remedies reflected this compassionate intent. Yes, they seem harsh to us now, but they were acts of release. Ways to help a troubled spirit finally rest. To free the soul to continue its journey. To move from this world to the next. They came from a place of care, not cruelty, but desire to bring peace to both the living and the dead. These beliefs weren't superstition in the negative sense. They were coping mechanisms. Ways for people to process grief, to deal with the constant presence of death in their lives, to feel some sense of control and understanding. In a world where so much was uncertain, where death came suddenly and often. These stories provided structure, meaning, a way to navigate loss. The literary creation. Now, let us jump forward in time. From the 15th century to the 19th. From medieval Wallachia to Victorian London to the year 1897, when an Irish writer would forever link the name Dracula with the vampire legend. His name was Abraham Stoker, called Bram by his friends. He was born in Dublin in 1847. Sickly as a child, bedridden for years with an unknown illness. Perhaps this early experience with vulnerability, with the fear of death, shaped his later fascination with the undead. As an adult, Stoker moved to London. He worked as the business manager for the Lyceum Theatre for the famous actor Henry Irving. But in his spare time, he wrote. He was fascinated by Gothic horror, by the supernatural, by the vampire legends he had read. Vampire stories were popular in Victorian times. In 1819, John Polidori wrote The Vampire. In 1872, Sheridan Le Fanu wrote Carmilla, about a female vampire in Austria. There was even a long serialized story called Varney the Vampire, published in the 1840s as cheap weekly booklets. These stories introduced many elements we associate with vampires. The fangs, the seductive nature, the aristocratic bearing. Stoker spent years researching his novel. He visited the British Library, read travel books about Eastern Europe, studied maps of Transylvania and the Carpathian Mountains, though he never actually visited Romania. His vision of this land was entirely from books, from his imagination, filtered through the fog of Victorian Gothic sensibility. During his research, Stoker came across a book by William Wilkinson, Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, published in 1820. In this book, Wilkinson mentioned Vlad Dracula, called Dracula in the text, and noted that in Wallachia, this name could mean devil. Stoker was struck by the name, by its sound, by its meaning. In his early notes, his vampire was called Count Womper. But after discovering this historical reference, he changed it. His vampire would be Dracula, a nobleman from Transylvania, from the region near the Borgo Pass. Living in a crumbling castle in the mountains, sleeping in his native earth, unable to cross running water, vulnerable to garlic, to Christian symbols, to sunlight, able to transform into a bat, a wolf, mist. Stoker's novel was published in 1897. Dracula. It was moderately successful. though it didn't make Stoker rich or particularly famous during his lifetime. He died in 1912, in relative obscurity, never knowing that his creation would become immortal. The book was structured as a series of diary entries, letters, newspaper clippings, multiple viewpoints, creating a sense of reality, of documentary evidence. The story follows Count Dracula leaving his Transylvanian castle, traveling to England, seeking new blood, new victims, pursued by a group led by the vampire hunter Abraham Van Helsing. How much of the historical Vlad did Stoker actually know? Very little, it seems. He borrowed the name, the general location, the association with the word devil. But his Dracula was not a historical figure. It was a Gothic creation, an aristocratic predator, charming and terrifying, old and powerful, a symbol of predatory aristocracy, of foreign invasion, of sexual danger. All the anxieties of Victorian England projected onto a Transylvanian nobleman. The historical Vlad, the real Dracula, was not a vampire. He was a medieval prince, a warrior, a politician, a man shaped by his brutal times. But Bram Stoker's novel would ensure that forever after, the name Dracula would mean only one thing to most of the world: vampire. The Castle of Shadows. There is one more connection to explore between legend and reality. The story of Bran Castle. Bran Castle stands in Transylvania, about 25 kilometers from the city of Brasov. It was built in the late 1300s, around 1377 to 1388, by the Saxons, German merchants who had settled in Transylvania centuries before. The castle served multiple purposes: a fortress defending the mountain pass, a customs house collecting tolls from traders, a deterrent to invaders coming from the south, from Wallachia. The castle rises on a rocky outcrop. Its white walls and red roofs are dramatic, picturesque, Gothic in the way Victorians loved. Mist often settles in the valley. Forests surround it. It looks exactly like what people imagine when they think Dracula's castle. But here's the truth. Historical records show no evidence that Vlad III ever owned this castle, or even visited it. Some historians suggest he might have been briefly imprisoned there for 2 months in 1462. But even this is uncertain, debated. The castle was in Transylvania, which was Hungarian territory, not Wallachian. Vlad had no property there. Bran Castle's association with Dracula is a 20th century marketing creation. In the 1970s, as tourism to Romania began developing, local authorities noticed the castle fit perfectly with Western images of where Dracula should live. It became Dracula's castle for tourists. A brand, an attraction, and tourists came. Hundreds of thousands every year, seeking the vampire, finding a medieval fortress with no connection to either the historical prince or the fictional vampire. Bram Stoker's novel never mentions Bran Castle by name. His descriptions are vague. A castle on a precipice, with commanding views. But some of the illustrations in early editions of the novel bear a striking resemblance to Bran. Perhaps the illustrators used images of Bran as their model, and so a connection was created. Not through history, but through art, through imagination, through the power of story to reshape reality. If you want to find Vlad's actual castle, you must travel further into the mountains, to Poenary Castle. The fortress rebuilt by the boyars he enslaved. Perched on a cliff above the Argesh River. Reachable only by climbing those 1,480 steps. Now it lies in ruins. Crumbling walls. Empty chambers. Haunted not by vampires, but by history, by memory, by the ghosts of all those who suffered and died there. Few tourists visit Poenary. It's difficult to reach. There's no gift shop, no restaurant. Just ruins and ravens. Wind whistling through broken stones. Perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps the real Dracula, the historical Vlad, prefers the quiet, the forgotten fortress, while his name, transformed, enjoys immortal fame elsewhere. Echoes through time. The many faces of Dracula. After Bram Stoker's novel came into the world, the vampire named Dracula began his own immortal existence. Not in shadows and coffins, but in the minds of readers, and eventually, on stages and screens. The first theatrical adaptation came in 1924. On Broadway, starring a Hungarian actor named Bela Lugosi. Then in 1931, came the film that would define the character for generations. Dracula, directed by Todd Browning, with Lugosi reprising his stage role. Lugosi's portrayal created the template. The slick-back hair, the dramatic cape, the thick accent. I want to drink your blood, spoken slowly, deliberately. His Dracula was exotic, foreign, seductive yet terrifying. A gentleman monster. This image became so iconic that even today, when people think vampire, they often picture something close to Lugosi's portrayal. But cinema's love affair with Dracula was only beginning. In 1958, Britain's Hammer Film Productions released their version, starring Christopher Lee as the Count. Lee's Dracula was different. more physical, more violent, more explicitly sexual, with blood and vivid technicolor, fangs dripping red. Lee would play the role 9 times over 15 years, each film adding layers to the legend. Then came other interpretations. Klaus Kinski in 1979, Frank Langella in 1979, Gary Oldman in 1992 in Francis Ford Coppola's lavish adaptation. Each actor brought something new. Kinski's feral intensity, Langella's romantic tragedy, Oldman's wounded ancient soul seeking lost love. The character evolved with each generation. In the 1970s and 80s, Dracula became campy, comedic, a figure in parody and pastiche. Count Chocula selling breakfast cereal. Sesame Street's Count Von Count teaching children to count. One wonderful number. Ah. But the character also deepened. In Rice's Interview with the Vampire in 1976, though not about Dracula specifically, changed how we think about vampires. As tragic figures, immortals burdened by endless existence, wrestling with morality, with loneliness, with the weight of centuries. Television embraced vampires too. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, True Blood, The Vampire Diaries. Vampires became anti-heroes, love interests, complex characters rather than simple monsters. The Dracula name appeared again and again, sometimes the character himself, sometimes just the shadow of his influence. Video games, comic books, graphic novels, Castlevania, Hellsing, countless others. The character of Dracula, or vampires inspired by him, became woven into popular culture so thoroughly that it's impossible to imagine our modern mythology without him. And what of the real Vlad? The historical prince? He remains mostly forgotten, overshadowed completely by the fictional vampire. Ask anyone on the street about Dracula. They'll describe the vampire, the cape, the fangs, the Transylvanian castle. Very few know about the medieval prince, the Ottoman hostage, the defender of Wallachia, the man who actually lived and died in those mountains 500 years ago. Perhaps that's the ultimate irony. Vlad Dracula sought to be remembered, to be feared, to leave a mark on history that wouldn't fade. And he succeeded, but not in the way he imagined. Not as a warrior, not as a prince, but as something else entirely. Something that never dies. Something that feeds on imagination rather than blood. A legend. An archetype. An immortal in the only way that truly matters, in the realm of story. the tourist's Dracula. Today, if you travel to Romania, to Transylvania, you'll find that the Dracula legend has become intertwined with tourism. Bran Castle, despite having little historical connection to Vlad, receives over 500,000 visitors each year. People from around the world, seeking the atmosphere, the Gothic architecture, the mysterious beauty of the Carpathian region. The guides are careful to separate fact from fiction, acknowledging the complex history while sharing the legends that have captured imaginations worldwide. Romania itself is a land of extraordinary beauty. Ancient forests, medieval towns, Orthodox monasteries with stunning frescoes, vibrant folk traditions that have survived for centuries. The Dracula legend is just one small part of a rich and diverse culture. A culture with contributions to science, literature, music, art. Many Romanians take pride in Vlad III as a historical figure. A leader who defended his homeland during difficult times. A symbol of resistance, of courage, of determination to preserve independence. This is the Vlad they honor. The prince, not the vampire. The defender, not the monster. The Vampire Association is recognized as a separate phenomenon, a creation of Western literature and cinema, not a reflection of Romanian culture or values, but rather a testament to how powerfully stories can capture global imagination, transforming and traveling far beyond their origins. What matters is understanding the difference between the historical prince and the fictional vampire, between the real Romania, with its warm hospitality, its beautiful landscapes, its deep history, and the Gothic fantasy created by writers who never visited these lands. Both can coexist. History and legend, reality and imagination. Each with its own truth, its own value. Between history and myth, let us consider now the nature of legends. How do they form? How does history transform into myth? Every legend begins with a kernel of truth, a real person, a real event. But as time passes, as stories are told and retold, details change. Exaggerations creep in. The line between fact and fiction blurs, until what remains is something new. Neither purely true nor purely false. A story that serves a purpose beyond mere historical accuracy. The historical Vlad was brutal. This much is certain. He ruled through fear. He executed thousands. But was he uniquely cruel? Or was he simply a man of his time, using the tools available to him, in an age when mercy was often seen as weakness, and strength required demonstrations of power that shock our modern sensibilities? Compare him to other rulers of his era. Ivan the Terrible of Russia, Henry VIII of England, the Spanish Inquisition, the Ottoman Sultan himself, all used violence, torture, public executions as tools of governance. Vlad was perhaps more theatrical in his cruelty, more willing to use fear systematically, but not necessarily more deadly than his contemporaries. Yet Vlad's reputation, even in his lifetime, exceeded others. Why? Perhaps because of the early printing press. German merchants who hated him, who had suffered under his rule, printed pamphlets describing his atrocities. These were among the first mass-produced books in Europe, distributed widely, read by thousands. The first viral media, spreading his infamy far beyond Wallachia's borders. In Russia, interestingly, the stories about Vlad were different. Russian chronicles portrayed him as harsh but just. A ruler who maintained order, who protected his people, who punished only the guilty. The same actions, viewed through a different cultural lens, became either monstrous or admirable. And then, 400 years later, Bram Stoker borrowed the name, attached it to a vampire. And in that moment, history and fiction became permanently entangled. The real Dracula and the fictional one merged in the public consciousness, inseparable. This is the power of story. Story outlasts empires, outlasts castles, outlasts even memory. The Wallachia that Vlad defended is gone, absorbed into Romania, its borders redrawn many times. The Ottoman Empire he fought has vanished. Constantinople became Istanbul. The medieval world he knew has been swept away completely, by modernity, by technology, by centuries of change. But the story remains. Transformed, yes. Distorted, certainly. But alive. Still told. Still inspiring fear and fascination. Still drawing travelers to misty mountains and Gothic castles. Still appearing in our entertainment, our dreams, our nightmares. Is this immortality? Not the supernatural kind, but the immortality of narrative? To live on not in body, but in story? To become myth? To transcend the boundaries of a single life, a single death, and enter the realm of archetype? The eternal night. Let us return once more to the folklore, to those beliefs about the strigoi, the vampires of Romanian legend. Because in these old superstitions, we find something profound, something that speaks to the human condition. Why did people believe in vampires? Why did they fear the dead returning? These beliefs existed not just in Romania, but across cultures. Different names, different details, but the same basic fear. The fear that death is not final, that those who die in certain ways, violent ways, wrong ways, cannot rest, cannot let go, cannot move on to whatever comes next. Perhaps these legends express our anxiety about death itself, the great unknown. We want to believe death is peaceful, that our loved ones find rest. But what if they don't? What if pain or anger or unfinished business keeps them tethered to this world? The vampire becomes a metaphor for grief that won't end, for trauma that won't heal, for the past that refuses to stay buried. The remedies for vampirism in folklore, the stakes, the decapitation, the burning. These are acts of release, ways to help the dead finally die, to let go, to move from this world to the next. They're brutal, yes, but they come from a place of belief. Belief that the dead deserve peace, and that the living can help them find it. In medieval times, people lived so close to death. Infant mortality was high. Plagues came without warning. Wars swept through regions regularly. Life expectancy was short. Everyone knew loss, intimate loss, regular loss. The boundary between life and death seemed thinner then, more permeable. Death was not something that happened in hospitals, behind closed doors. It happened at home, in the fields, in the streets. It was visible, present, unavoidable. So of course they developed elaborate beliefs about death, about how to die well, about how to help the dead rest, about protecting the living from restless spirits. These weren't just superstitions. They were coping mechanisms, ways to process grief, ways to feel some control. In a world where control was rare, where death came suddenly and often. And what of sleep? Our nightly descent into unconsciousness? Medieval people called sleep death's brother. Every night, we lie down, close our eyes, and for hours, we are gone. Not dead, but not quite alive either. In some intermediate state, vulnerable, dreaming, traveling to places that don't exist, meeting people who aren't there, experiencing things that never happen. No wonder they connected sleep with death, with spirits, with the supernatural. The night was full of mystery, full of danger. No electric lights, just darkness, broken occasionally by fire and candle. Shadows everywhere. The howling of wolves in the forest, the creaking of old houses, the wind that sounds like voices, speaking, calling, drawing and toward the unknown. But here, now, in this moment, you are safe. The night holds no danger for you. Only rest. Only peace. Only the gentle darkness that allows the body to heal, the mind to process, the soul to restore itself. The lesson of legends. What can we learn from the story of Dracula? Both the historical prince and the legendary vampire? What wisdom lies in these tales of darkness? Perhaps the first lesson is about fear. Vlad ruled through fear, creating terror as a tool of control. And it worked. For a time. His enemies feared him. His subjects obeyed him. But fear is unstable, unpredictable. Those who rule by fear often die violently, betrayed, abandoned, alone. Vlad's own people turned against him, supporting his brother, allowing his fall. Fear can control, but it cannot inspire loyalty, cannot create lasting bonds, cannot build something beautiful or enduring. Fear is the tool of the desperate, of those who cannot imagine another way. The second lesson is about how we're remembered. Vlad wanted to be remembered as a great prince, a defender of Christendom, a strong ruler. And he is remembered, but not as he intended, not as a hero to most of the world, but as a monster, a name that means vampire, evil, darkness. We cannot control our legacies, cannot dictate how history will judge us. The stories others tell about us, after we're gone, those stories belong to the tellers, not to us. The third lesson is about the power of imagination. Bram Stoker never met Vlad, never visited his castles, never walked his lands. Yet Stoker's imagined Dracula has influenced millions, has created an entire genre, has shaped how we think about vampires, evil, immortality, seduction and danger. One man's imagination, writing in a library in London, created something that rivals the impact of the historical prince, perhaps exceeds it. Stories have power. The stories we tell ourselves, about others, about the world. These stories shape reality, create meaning, give structure to chaos. The vampire is a story we tell about predatory aristocracy, about foreign invasion, about sexual danger, about mortality and immortality, about the thin line between life and death. And finally, perhaps the deepest lesson is about the shadow. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, spoke of the shadow self, the parts of ourselves we reject, repress, refuse to acknowledge, the anger, the hunger, the selfishness, the capacity for cruelty. These aspects don't disappear. They gather in the darkness of our unconscious, and sometimes they emerge. The vampire represents this shadow, the respectable aristocrat by day, the predator by night, the civilized exterior, hiding the monstrous interior. We fear vampires, but we're also fascinated by them, because we recognize something, some truth about human nature, about ourselves. To be whole, Jung taught, we must acknowledge the shadow, integrate it, not act on our darker impulses, but recognize they exist. Accept them as part of being human. Only then can we truly know ourselves. And in knowing ourselves, find peace. Returning to the light, our journey through the shadows is nearly complete. We've traveled from medieval mountains, through dark legends and Gothic literature, through cinema and popular culture, and now we return to this moment, this breath, this peaceful present. The stories we've explored tonight are stories of darkness, yes, of violence and fear, of death and the undead, but they're also stories of human resilience, of the power of imagination, of how we process our fears by transforming them into narratives, into legends, into art. Vlad III lived 500 years ago, in a brutal time, in a dangerous place. He did what he thought necessary to survive, to protect his land. His methods were harsh, his legacy complicated, but he was human, shaped by his experiences, by his trauma, by his times. Neither pure villain nor pure hero, but something in between, as we all are. The vampire Dracula, Bram Stoker's creation, is a mirror, showing us our fears, our fascinations, our anxieties about mortality, about power, about desire. Every generation reimagines the vampire to reflect its own concerns, its own shadows, and so the legend evolves, immortal in its constant rebirth. But here, now, in this safe space, these stories are just that. Stories. The darkness they describe cannot touch you. You are warm, comfortable, protected, surrounded by peace. The night outside your window is not something to fear, but something to embrace. Night is when we rest, when we dream, when the body repairs itself, when the mind processes the day, sorts memories, releases stress. Night is a gift, a time of restoration. And sleep, dear sleep, is not death's brother, but life's companion, essential, nourishing, beautiful in its way. When we sleep, we trust, we let go of control, we surrender to the body's wisdom, knowing it will carry us through the dark hours and bring us back to morning, refreshed, renewed, ready to begin again. So let yourself drift now, deeper and deeper into rest. There are no vampires waiting in the shadows. Only peace, only stillness, only the gentle darkness that allows dreams to bloom. Let go of the stories. Let go of the images. Let go of everything. Just breathe and rest and know that you are safe. And now, as our journey ends, let us settle completely into deep, restorative sleep. Notice how heavy your body feels, how relaxed, every muscle soft, at peace, your breathing slow and steady. Your mind quiet, drifting. You are safe. You are comfortable. There is only rest now. Only peace. Only the gentle darkness that welcomes you into sleep. Let go completely. Fall softly into dreams. Sleep well. Sleep deeply. Wish you have a sweet dream.